Well, hello again, Facebook and YouTube, and anybody where else you're finding this stream on social media out there. Welcome back to our next 20 Minutes in the Word segment for August 19th, 2020, here at St. John Lutheran Church in Luxembourg, Wisconsin. You might be wondering how I'm doing this because I'm on vacation this week. Well, I pre-recorded everything last week. That way you guys wouldn't have to miss out on this stuff. So I meant a little bit more work earlier, but again, that way we just continue on with these videos. Hopefully they're helpful for you, and I do encourage you to share them, whether on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you want to. Put them out there so people can hopefully be impacted by the Word of God. So we're going to get into some more juicy stuff today, is I guess the best way to say it. We're going to get into some more discussion that is controversial, because 1 Corinthians is a controversial book. And so today we're at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to read verses 1 through 9. So my encouragement to you is whether you're reading it as a couple, an individual, as a family, or you got a group of people together, whoever it is, pause the video and open up your Bibles and read these first 9 verses. You may want to read back into chapter 6 a little bit and maybe even read on a little more into chapter 7, whichever you prefer, but pause the video and do your reading right now. All right, so we are dealing with marriage, but sex within marriage, and how that's meant to be. What are ways to guard against sexual immorality happening because of sex? You know, temptations, things like that. So, Paul talks of, actually, I'll just give you the question. How does Paul talk about his calling to celibacy and why it's impractical for most believers? So you'll have to look, verse 1 really deals with it. He deals with it a little bit in verse 6 and 8. And you may have to kind of cross-research that in other places in the Bible. So pause the video and talk about what he's sharing about celibacy, but also why it's impractical for most. So Paul talks about celibacy as a calling, that it's really something that God has to call a person into. It's not something that most people would choose, because again, we are hardwired with sexual identities, sexual, not only gender, but just sex in mind. We hit puberty and our body starts reacting to certain stimuluses. And that's the way God designed us. When he created us male and female, he created us to want sex so that we would leave our parents' home and have a one flesh union with somebody in the future, which would be our spouse. It was meant to be a man and a woman, okay? You can get into all the other discussions about all the other stuff. I'm just reading to you what the Bible itself is talking about here. So, the word has to win out on what we believe. You can read other things into it, but that's dangerous, if not outright wrong. Okay? So, having said that, Paul shares that it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, and vice versa. We can infer it would be good for a woman not to have sexual relations with a man if that's their calling. If they don't need this stimulation, don't need this part in their life, great. Because now they can devote that much more of their life to serving the Lord. Because they don't have a family, they don't have a spouse. All they can do, like Paul, he lived his life to go about the known world and point people to Jesus and what he'd done for Paul and everybody else in all of God's creation. But for people who don't have that calling, for people who do have sexual urges, then they need to get married. Because if they don't, they're going to face growing temptation to somehow give in to sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is basically sex outside of what God intended. And there's a lot of discussion on this. We have several different cases, several different ways that can happen. So for instance, if somebody has lost their spouse, so they're a widow or widower, and they still have these sexual feelings, Paul's encouraging here later on, go get married again. If you're unmarried or you're a widow and it's good for them to remain single as I am, he says in verse 8, but If they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. And it's okay to remarry. The church has even taken that to a degree with divorce today. If a person was not the one who caused the divorce, or if a person has repented of what they did to cause a divorce, it's okay for them to get remarried. Because it'd be better for them to be remarried than to be living in this sexual immorality. That's the way that at least our church, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, has treated it. Because which is the lesser of two evils in this sense, our context. So, what's happening? Well, again, if we have the calling of celibacy, great. If we don't, then go get married. Which leads us to the next question. How do we honor each other's authority over our bodies? This is what he talks about in verses 2 through verse 5. So pause the video and talk about that, especially in the light of this concept of conjugal rights that were in the Old Testament, in other nations, as well as maybe even in our world today. All right, so to even dive into this, we have to first address this thing that he brings up, conjugal rights. In the Christian church, as well as in the Jewish church before that, the precursor to the Christian church, there was not a concept of conjugal rights. But in the world around it, there was. So for instance, in the Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, other empires where women were not treated in the same way. When they got married, and we still see this in the world today, sadly, in many cultures, that when you get married, there's this idea that men just have a right to the bodies of their wives. Well, Paul dashes that idea here. He dashes that idea in the sense that, so the husband has authority over the wife of the wife has the authority over the husband's wife. Because they share mutual authority, neither of them can command the other to have sex. Neither should be forcing the other to have sex. That this needs to be a mutual thing. This is in the truest sense where both people have authority over their own body, authority over the other person's body. They're working as a team. That's the picture of a one flesh union. That for me, I'm going to be thinking about the needs of my wife. My wife's going to be thinking about my needs. We're not going to deny each other's needs. We're going to try to meet in the middle. We're going to try to help each other in all things, not just sexual things. All things we can extrapolate on this. But in terms of sexual, Paul realizes there is a need, that some people struggle with this temptation. And if they're not doing this, that actually the spouse who's withholding sex from the other spouse could be guilty of causing the other spouse's sin. Here's my recommendation. Okay, I'm going to go off topic a little bit here. If your marriage is very frigid, if you both aren't having sex regularly enough for the needs of both parties, you have a problem. And you need to get in and get some marriage counseling. If you want to call me, give me a call, text me, email me, whatever. You got my contact information on our YouTube page and our church website. That's a sign that there's something drastically wrong in your relationship. You know, just from a statistical standpoint, psychological standpoint, couples that are having sex less than once a month, couples who haven't had sex in years, unless there's a physical issue, something's wrong and you need to get help, and you need to get it now, because you're living on bought or borrowed time. Okay? Just my 2 cents. Anyways, coming back. So, again, husbands should not force themselves on their wives. Wives should not force themselves on their husbands. There should be no guilt and shaming into sex. This needs to be a mutual decision together. One flesh union. Now, last question. What concepts is Paul giving us for sex in a marriage, for remarriage, and for self-control? What are the concepts that he's putting out here? And this is bigger than just sex, okay? So, pause the video and talk through that. Well, the best place that we can see this concept is in verse 9. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So we can take what Paul's talking about here and we can extrapolate that into other sins as well. What Paul's trying to do here is he's trying to help people build, in essence, an accountability system. So if I have a pet sin, a habitual sin that I'm struggling with, I need to set things up. I need to rely on the help of other people or set things up myself so that I'm guarded against that sin. If I have a problem with porn, put some software on my computer so that it keeps me from looking at it. If that's not enough, bring a spouse involved, get other people involved. Because, again, the more we can protect ourselves from struggling with these habitual sins, the less likely that those habitual sins are going to somehow take us away from Jesus. Take our faith away. Because otherwise Satan's waiting to use anything he can against us. And the number one tool that he has is shame. Shame's a way that he backs people into a corner all the time and convinces them God can't possibly love you. God can't possibly forgive you. That's a lie. God can forgive you. I will tell you practically, as a pastor who's done a lot of counseling with couples, shame tears couples apart. If we as couples could learn to talk to our spouses about what's going on in us, the things we're ashamed of. You see, intimacy, true intimacy, isn't just about sticking things in people and pleasure that way. True intimacy is knowing another person intimately, mind, body, soul, and sharing with them, being comfortable enough to share with them not just our intimate parts, but our whole life, including our fears and our shames. Sex is a way that we can be intimate, but there's more to it than just the physical act. There's this connection, there's this trust. And sadly, too many guys don't get that. I'm going to pick on the guys for a second, okay? Too many guys think it's simply about the act and some response from their wife. I think wives, and I will tell you this because my wife has told me and I am guilty of not listening to her, wives would rather just share some intimate time where they feel loved, they feel connected, they feel held and special than any amount of sticking things in them and arousing them or whatever. Vice versa, ladies. What's hard to understand about us guys is we feel a connection to you when we do make you feel good, when we do please you. And there's a shame in us when we feel like we can't. And so that's where, again, taking Paul's words here, talking through these things, working on building trust, working on understanding each other, mind, body, soul. All right, that's all I got for you today. Again, I encourage you. Well, I'm not going to encourage you to do gratitude journals or anything today. I'm going to encourage you as couples, find some times to intimately connect mind, body, soul. All right, God's blessings on your day, everybody. And